Wes. That guy over there, his name is Jacob. I don't know. We haven't seen each other in months, so I don't really remember what his name is.
Almost a year.
Has it really?
Yep, it's been a year almost.
This podcast is not for you, I guess. We're here. We haven't recorded in a long time. There's been a lot of life stuff going on. As you can see, Peyton has drastically changed his appearance. But no, we've been busy. We've been doing a lot of life stuff. Peyton got married recently. Not this Peyton, the other Peyton. He got married recently. I'm about to have a baby. Jake got married. You got married in the gap of this, didn't you? Yeah, Jake also got married. So we've been busy and haven't been able to record. But we got another game from Stonemaier Games in St. Louis, and we wanted to review it.
Yes,
and
we
record
did.
An episode. There will eventually be more This Podcast Is Not For You episodes come out after life settles down a little bit, maybe, if life settles down a little bit. So today we have a guest. You've seen him before if you're a listener, or you've heard him before if you're a listener. You have seen him before if you're a viewer. His name is Natty.
Hey.
Everybody give it up.
Thank
Can you hear the audience?
The live audience.
The live audience is just roaring. So we're going to toss this over to Natty because you have a depth of knowledge in board games. You've been into the board game world for a long time.
Yes.
And you're the resident expert. So you're in charge now.
Sweet. Okay.
Jake, let's go.
I've always wanted my own podcast. Here we go.
We built this brand for years, and now it's yours. You're welcome.
Hey, thanks.
We're passing it on like you're a child.
You guys mind if we just do board games from now on? Is that good? I guess
This
board game is not for you.
Right,
Yeah. Oh, that would be the worst title.
Yeah,
This board game is not for you.
It's only bad board games.
Okay, yeah. So today we're talking about Scythe, which is a 2017 board game that's designed and published by Jamie Stegmaier of Stonemaier Games, a very prolific board game designer and publisher. They're doing a lot in the business right now. Mm-hmm. And arguably Scythe is probably his most popular self-designed game, I would say. We'll talk a little bit later on about maybe some more Stonemaier games, but just to kind of kick things off,
Can I interject real quick?
Please.
I meant to say it while Wes was introducing, but as the resident board game expert, we recently gave a TED Talk, so if you want to watch that, we'll hyperlink that real quick. It's about board games in general, why they're important, why we love them, and so anyway, just wanted to get that out of the way. As a resident expert, he gave a TED Talk about it. I was there also, but he gave a TED Talk. And
Nice plug.
We're up there. All right.
Anyway, hyperlink right now.
Great.
Intercode something for a discount.
For a discount at checkout. Yeah.
10% off. Okay, great. Yeah, let's talk about the game. So the game sort of takes place in an alternate sort of universe called Europa, where sort of there's a historical change around the Soviet Union time, and people have animal companions, and there are also these gigantic mechs that go around and just help make life easier or harder. All that really kind of comes through in the theme, but really what you're going to try and do in this game is have the most money at the end. So you can get money in a variety of ways, but one of the things that you want to try and do is you're wanting to try and be popular by the end of the game, enough that you can sort of multiply the other ways that your strategy kind of takes off in the game. So on your turn, you're going to have sort of 4 different actions on your board that you can do. There's a top action on each section, and there's a bottom action. Now, the cool thing about Scythe is that outside of all of the components, if you're watching this, you can see that they're a little
outside of all the components.
Yeah, you can see that there's mechs and things like that, which look really cool. But one of the coolest things about this design is that you incrementally are going to get better as you play the game. So the top actions are going to have things like these little blocks that say, hey, you have to pay this much to do this action, or whenever you do this action, you get this much. But as you go on and meet different criteria throughout the game, you're actually going to remove the things from the top which is going to mean that your action is more powerful, and you're going to fill in a space at the bottom, which means that the cost of things is going to be cheaper for you. So as you go on, you're just going to get incrementally more powerful. There is combat in the game. So as you can see, there's mechs and wolves and things like that. So you'd think there would probably be combat, but combat actually doesn't have as big of a bite as you might think in this game.
It's not quite like Risk, where it's completely built around the combat.
In fact, you can pretty well go a whole game without combat if you want to, which kind of gets us into sort of more of the in-game stuff. So everybody's going to have 6 stars of their color, and throughout the game there are about 10 or 12 different criteria that as soon as you reach it in the game, you can put one of your stars down, and the game is going to end when one player has put all 6 of their stars down. So you can get stars from doing a lot of different things, like making all your mechs go out on the board. You can get a star for playing in a combat. You can get a star for getting a certain amount of power, a certain amount of popularity. You can get stars for completing a secret objective that everybody gets at the start of the game. But with there's 12 different ways that you can do that. But there's a lot of different avenues that you can take to end the game, or you could get to a state towards the end of the game where you aren't really ready for it to go. So it's kind of becomes this game of everybody kind of holding back, putting their last star because they want to try and squeeze a few more coins out of it. But Wes, earlier you kind of likened it a little bit to Risk, or you mentioned Risk, and I would say for people that are just coming into the hobby, that would probably be the best touch point for them. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would say like a mix between a Risk and like a little bit of something like Settlers of Catan or something, like kind of a resource thing, but also a little bit of the territory aspect of Risk, more so than the combat thing.
Totally.
But yeah, when you glance at it, you go, that kind of looks like Risk.
Yeah.
Like there's definitely an aesthetic similarity, and it doesn't go much deeper than that.
Yeah.
But I would agree that's probably the closest touch point.
Yeah. Now, I would say if we could like classify this game, it's sort of like the epitome of like a snowball down the hill. Like whenever you start the game, you're going to be extremely restricted. That was one of the comments that almost everybody made whenever we played it last. You start out on this little sort of like peninsula, and you've got like 3 places that you can go. And one of the core rules of this game is you can't cross rivers until you get the power to do that. So you've kind of got to build up what you can in a few little spaces. But each space only produces a certain kind of resource. So you might be totally blocked off from a resource that might let you get mechs out on the board, or might let you upgrade some of your stuff. So you want to try and do your best that you can within the first 3 or 4 squares or the 3 or 4 hexes that you've got. And then eventually, as you gain access to more of the land, you're going to get more options. But one of the cool things about this game is Wes was talking about resources. So there are 4 different resources that you're going to get. There's wood, oil, steel, and grain or food. But the cool thing about this is that whenever you produce any of the resources in the game, those are your resources as long as you control the spot that they are in. So if I produced food, they're going to stay in this hex. But if Jake comes over with his big scary mech and he forces me out of that spot, now those are his grains, or that's his steel, which always kind of lends to this idea that nothing is ever really satisfied, or nothing is ever really secure until you spend it. But that kind of leads to sort of like the snowball effect that I was talking about before, because there does come a point at the end of the game where everybody's got options. And it kind of comes to this point of like, okay, well, how do I want to end this? Because I've got all the options that I want out here on the board.
Yeah.
That's kind of like a really brief overview. It's difficult to explain a game like this succinctly, I would say, especially if you're watching it, you can kind of see there's a lot going on here. But would you guys have anything to add?
Yeah,
to
I think typical with Stonemaier Games, they are deceptively complicated at the beginning. Yeah. Like, anytime you open up something like this, or Wingspan, or Between Two Castles, which is, I would say, on the simpler side of their games, it's like, oh, this is a lot of stuff and a lot of mechanics. But really, once you start playing it, it's not nearly as complicated as it seems. It's
Yeah.
just there's a lot of world building on it too, and like terminology that you kind of have to learn because it's specific to the theme of the game.
Yeah.
It's not
Yeah.
just like you get points. It's
Yeah.
much more specific to, you know, oil, wood, grain. Like it's much more specific to the theme of the. So there's a little bit of a barrier of entry just because Stonemaier Games can come across as very complicated whenever
Totally.
you start.
Yeah.
But they simplify as you go, I think.
Yeah, and I think to that point, I'm sure we'll talk about this a little bit later,
Yeah.
but I feel like this is probably the most like heavy on the front end game, especially from Stonemaier. It looks extremely complicated. By the time you get to your third turn, you're like, okay, I totally understand what's going on. But this one far and away just seems like so front loaded, just because there's so many little pieces that represent
Yeah.
pretty basic concepts. Actually.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah, I mean, when you were like teaching us how to play for the first time, I think you said, "All right, last thing," like 8 times, like just because that's the level of intricacy that the game has, but that doesn't necessarily always mean that a game is super complicated. I think
Right.
something that is common in my like vernacular is the game's easy, but it's not simple. And it's
Yeah.
like, this is not easy by any means, but it's once you understand it, it is fairly simple.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean it's easy to be good at. That doesn't mean it's easy to understand. But if this, then this, which is very Stonemaier. But I think this
when-
one is that.
When you get into more
Yeah.
complicated games where you have so a lot of like older classic games, you kind of have like 1, maybe 2 options each turn. Like you don't have 4 to 5 options of things that you can do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Those things that you can do are simple, but even having the 4 or 5 options, I think for some people is like, okay, what can I do again? Like I have a lot of choice, but I think to your point, Natty, whenever you're on your 3rd or 4th turn, you kind of start to get it. The well, we'll get into downsides, but like one side of a game like that is the first time you play it, just go into it with the expectation of this isn't really playing it for
Totally.
the first time.
Yeah.
Because by the 3rd or 4th turn, you've probably made a mistake that's going to cost you the game.
Yeah,
You know?
totally. But I do also think that there are some games that whenever you realize that, you're like, okay, there's no way I can win. I'm just gonna like get through it. I feel like for games like this game specifically, and games of this ilk, you can still capture the heart of it, and you can still feel like you can still get a pretty good idea of what you think of the game after the first play, which isn't always true, you know. I think.
For sure. And this one especially, I think that idea that, I mean, that's very common. I say that all the time. It's the first time. Who cares? I'm not going to win. It doesn't matter. And this one specifically, you might feel that way and then halfway through be like, I think I got a chance at this thing.
Yeah.
Because this specific game, the design of this is every turn you're taking at the beginning is actually making you more powerful, stronger, setting you up for more moves. So, you know, you might not know what you're doing, but at the same time you're, now I can place my mill, and I didn't even know that would be cool, but if I do that, then, so it's like you're doing all these things and you don't know.
And in typical Stonemaier fashion, you don't always know what the other people are doing.
True.
Like, you don't necessarily know how far along the path
Yeah.
your opponent is.
This is, you have to put your money, everyone has to be able to see it.
But they,
But
yeah, you
they
have to
can
stack
try to
it.
count it if
Yeah.
you know, yeah.
Yeah, that's a
Even
rule.
to that, it's like the rule says it has to be out for everyone to
This
see.
is probably
but
the most conflict-oriented game of theirs that I've played. But even still, it's not like you're constantly aware,
Totally.
oh, I'm getting crushed right
Yeah.
now. You kind of don't really know unless
Yeah.
you're really, really paying attention.
Yeah, it's very interesting because combat, there are definitely stakes in combat. Like I could lose all my oil, which means I
Yeah.
can't get a mech next turn. But it's also the teeth aren't all there, because really the worst case scenario is you go back to your house and you're a few turns behind now, but you can get back up there. It's not like anybody dies. It's not you're not like totally wiped out of the game, which is like, to the design credit, I'm like, there are a lot of games where you're like, you lose a couple combats and you're done. You know?
That's true. I mean, I remember one of the games we played, I think I was here and you were here and Chelsea was here and here. And I had to go through one of those spaces. And so it was like, I didn't even want to, but I had to because I had to move, for a specific reason that turn. And the competition element was the conflict element, I suppose. Sent Chelsea all the way back to her home base.
Yeah.
And I think I got to use the resources that were there, but it wasn't like, oh, I destroyed. It was just like, I have to move, and so it is one of the most like nuanced conflict things.
Yeah. And I think we can get more into that a little bit later, because I think there's a lot about this game that is surprising that it doesn't have as much teeth as you would expect it to have. Yeah. And I don't necessarily mean that as a negative, which we can talk about that later. But I think combat is a great example of something that you'd expect to have, or at least have a little more weight than it does. And again, I don't necessarily mean that in a negative way either.
Yeah.
You guys want to talk about like the general like presentation components before we get into like our official thoughts on it?
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
I mean, I was immediately impressed with the look of everything and the metal coins. I don't know if that is typical to every copy of Scythe, but I was like, that's really cool.
Yeah, I think that was an upgrade we picked up at Gen Con, a gaming convention we go to sometimes.
I think you can get those. I think it's not like I was looking online. I'm pretty sure you can acquire the metal coins. I don't know if it's in every copy or specific copies, but they are out there. So it's not like only Natty has these.
Sure.
But that was one element where I was like, these are actual metal coins. They feel weighty. Mm-hmm. And then the mechs, the little character, like these little character guys are really great. Like the map has a very distinct look to it. I was just really impressed. Typical Stonemaier in style, I think, and in like construction, but I was impressed by it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. If I'm not mistaken, I think that the world was just like some artwork that another person just designed, and I'm not exactly sure the sequence of events that brought the game about, but I think the art was in the world first, and then Jamie kind of like built a game around it. I'm not like 100%
well, it's
sure
super similar to oh gosh, there was a television show, Tales from the Loop. And the art that was based on an artist's stuff. Tales from the Loop was, and it's very similar. It's like rural farmland stuff, but with robots and like mech stuff integrated. So I don't know if maybe that was what was inspiring to him or what, but it's got a similar aesthetic to that. So
it feels historic. You know, not in like a but it feels like a alternate timeline. Revolutionary War type stuff, which is cool. I think the strongest thing of any Stonemaier game, in my opinion, is I guess Jamie designed games. What I would be speaking to, I can't say Stonemaier because it's also a distribution company. Jamie designed games are always very, very, very clear and concise in terms of their imagery. And so it's and that's what's super helpful in a game like this, is how you pick up on stuff very quickly, because you see the popularity symbol over here, you see it over there, you're like, oh, if I take this action, I bet I move up that track, perfect. And it's just all the way that he pieces together the mechanics and the rules through visuals is really good. Totally. And you don't ever have to, once you know how to play, you don't ever have to reference a turn sheet. You don't ever have to reference what does this mean, because you just, it's so obvious. And I don't know how you go about being really good at that, but I think Jamie excels at that. I think that's, in terms of, we're talking presentation, and that's what always jumps out to me the most. It's like you can look at it and start to learn how to play without ever picking up a rule book. Really, you're not going to know how to play, obviously, but you're like, these actions have to be connected. This thing, if I pick this up, oh yeah, okay, so there's resources crossing bodies of water. Okay, there's I mean, it's just like it's crazy. He's very good at it.
It's pretty intuitive.
Yeah.
There's some there, and that might add to the complexity level, though. That they're in the design of the setting. There's like depth and lore that never is like gotten into, but you can tell it's there. So I was gonna say that might add to the kind of overwhelming feel at first of a game like this, where you're like, I feel like there's a lot going on, but a lot of it has nothing to do with playing the game. It's all setting and lore and stuff like that, which never actually comes into anything you're doing, but it could add to the feeling of more complexity.
Yeah, that's a good point.
But the minis are great. I think, the little meeples are great. The meeples serve a purpose, as they all do. Everyone does. But...
Yeah, and if you haven't seen the characters, they're just like these like D&D standard size minis, but with like a giant animal companion at their side. They look crazy. They're awesome. But yeah, Jake, like I was thinking about like the graphic design and the icons as well. And like in a game where you can be somebody who has a giant tiger for a pet and you can put mechs out on the board, I think my favorite component is like especially like your personal board layout. Like they're not even just like the icons, like you're talking about, it's so intuitive. You can at a glance, like look at the board long enough, you could probably figure out most of the nuance there. But even like the layout of the board, where I take a piece from top and I put it in the bottom, and it all just kind of like trickles down, and everything sort of like tells you what the next step should be.
It's all color coded.
Yeah, and red is going to cost you something, green something you get. And so whenever you pull up another green thing, that's good. Whenever you cover up a red thing, that's bad. It's going to be cheap or good. It's going to be cheaper for you in the future. I really love the personal board layout, because it lends itself to simplicity in a game that might really not be for a lot of people.
But yeah, in terms of presentation, that's all that I have. I think the art's great, even if it came before, right? I could put hexagons on that, it doesn't matter. It's cool, So yeah, but I think the intuitiveness and sort of what Wes is saying is like all the mechs are different. So looking at it, you're like, oh, so that one must have a certain power. It's like, no, they're just mechs. Like that's the point.
Certain games would just duplicate and change the colors, but this one doesn't. Even the boards are laid out differently from each team. So there are emphasis of different things for different characters, whichever one you pick. Like I think I got that character whenever we played, and it was like, oh, this is pushing me to try to fight people. Like this character is definitely designed to go into combat.
His name's like Gunter.
It's right there in the name.
Perfect.
Yep.
Thanks, Jamie.
But like that's not every character. Not every character is designed to push you in the direction of go after people.
I think your guys could just swim across like from the get-go, right? Couldn't they swim across rivers or something?
Yes, they could. I remember that.
He was spending too much time in the water. He doesn't even
remember. I don't. That doesn't ring a bell, but sure.
You absolutely could.
Okay. My workers could, but my mechs couldn't or something. I remember there's a restriction.
I think your workers could from the start.
Yeah.
So all in all, I mean, I think you'd be really hard pressed to find a Stonemaier designed or published game that isn't kind of like top tier as far as presentation goes. But this one, I feel like kind of kicked it into a new gear.
Right. Yeah, I guess it's
Personally.
true. I don't know what the scene was like in 2017. This
Yeah.
it feels groundbreaking now, at least, not like brand new, but impressive, I guess would be
Yeah.
another word. And it could have felt impressive and groundbreaking and all in 2007, but board game publishing and board game distribution and design have grown leaps and bounds in the last few years. So,
That's what they're saying.
yeah.
Yeah, like this to me doesn't look like radically different than some other crunchier games that come out now. But putting yourself in the mindset that this came out 6 or 7 years ago,
Totally.
you're like, yeah, this was probably on the higher end, especially when it came out.
Boy,
Like,
yeah, and especially the cost, the production costs.
Yeah.
When
Yeah.
I don't know how far into the bell curve of the board game renaissance we were at that time, but it's like to invest this much in a game, before, I mean, certainly the bell curve increased on COVID, right? So 3 years before that, you think,
well, it's still expensive. Like
Yeah,
today,
totally.
it hasn't really. You can get it on sale and stuff, but it hasn't dropped in price in terms of. So it probably does cost a good amount to manufacture and put out
Yeah.
there.
And I mean, this is the last thing I'll probably have about components as far as they go, but I think nowadays, my wife and I back a lot of Kickstarters. And I think one of the trends that you're seeing, I mean, I definitely know that one of the trends that you're seeing
pretends that he's like, I think so, but
My theory.
is that a lot of Kickstarters kind of live and die on how much plastic they can sell you. They're like 500 minis, and it doesn't actually even matter a lot of the time if the game is good. They're going to make money from that. And I think that Jamie specifically has always been very counter to that idea. So one of the things I appreciate the most about this is that there are some plastic minis. You got your characters and you got your mechs. But there's not more plastic than there needs to be. And I think that everything that he could have done to, I'm saying this like he was the only head behind it. I don't know how many calls he made on the actual presentation of it. But everything that he could have done that didn't need to be plastic isn't plastic. It's wood or it's cardboard. And especially looking back now from 2023 and seeing where the board game scene is at right now, that's big, that's big. Because a game like this, he could have justified very easily kind of pushing that forward. But he hasn't. And I don't think that he really does very much either.
I would agree. Broad terms, generalizations and stuff, I would agree. Yeah.
Yeah, it's good.
Let's dive in
Let's do it.
to the next section that I know what it is. So, but I'm going to let Natty say what it is.
Yeah, because I mean, we all know.
Right.
We
We don't need to
Obviously.
say it, and then Natty can just say that it's that the
everyone
next
else that
section
doesn't
is.
Our thoughts on the game.
Okay,
thoughts
yeah,
on the
see,
game.
I was going to
Yeah.
say the same thing.
I thought that. So,
I did too.
Perfect.
Who wants to go first?
General thoughts, or because it's hard. It's okay. So general thoughts. Let's just go right into it.
Just
I guess.
give it a number and then move on.
That's all.
General thoughts. 17.
Okay.
Okay. Those
No
are my
out
general
of.
thoughts. No, yeah.
No out of.
So, I think the hardest thing in a game like this, for me personally, is, and these are my general thoughts. This is for me personally.
Just generally.
Just generally, I think the overwhelming sense of they call it in retail or in creative design or whatever. If you give people too many options, it's what's it called? It's
Like a decision overload or like.
yeah. It's the paradox of decision or something, some official term where if they have too many things to choose from, they lock up and
like decision paralysis.
I
almost.
think I can get there. And I mean, when we played, I have to say this, I won, but at the beginning of the time,
He's legally obligated.
I was like,
He doesn't
I had
have,
that.
doesn't have to say it.
I very much had to say, I don't know, and I was just doing stuff, and that is a big downside for me. Someone that likes to think they're forward thinking, they're strategic, they're methodical, they're practical in what they decide to do. That is a big downside for me, where and I don't know what it is about the design that has that effect, because it is very strategic. but it's almost like the worst kind, in my opinion, where 4 turns from now, I have to know what I'm going to do. And then that could change based on what someone else does. So then I have, and I guess it's just overwhelming and not in a good way. And I don't think, it's hard to get into it, even at the beginning of the game, and I've played it more than once. At the beginning of the game, again, when you I know how to play, I know what to do. I guess let me try to figure out what the game wants me to do first. And I don't enjoy that. And so I think I did have a... And I like I said, I won, and normally when I win, I'm like, dude, that was so fun. But we got done, and I'm like, yeah, I won. Cool. And it never felt... It doesn't feel fun, in my opinion. And I don't know why, and I don't know how, but I enjoyed playing it after. Even the next day we talked about it. I'm like, yeah, I think that was... I enjoyed it. I think it was fun, but it never felt fun. And I don't know why. I don't know. So, but those are my general thoughts, I guess.
Sure.
Just generally.
My opinion.
So I should give mine then?
Sure.
Or should I give yours?
You can't give mine. That's the problem. Yeah.
So my general thoughts, these are mine. Personally. I have wanted to play this game for a very long time. It has been recommended to me numerous times by numerous people because out of the classic board games, your Clues, your Life, your Risk, all of that stuff. Risk was always one of my favorites because it felt like it actually had strategy. Some of the old classic games, it's completely random, not really that strategic. But I always liked Risk, and so because of that, people have been like, oh, you should play Scythe, because there's a similarity there. So that might have partially impacted my expectations of it, but I've also liked pretty much everything I've played from Stonemaier Games, so expectations were high coming into it.
Uh-oh.
I enjoyed playing it. I thought it was well designed. It did make me want to play it again. I think if I had an issue with it, it would be I feel like the combat does need to have a bit more teeth to it.
Okay.
I wasn't a fan of the combat mechanic.
Okay.
You pick you get cards that are like your ability to attack, right?
They have a number on them, and that's going to add to your attack. Yeah.
I think it actually would have benefited, in my opinion, with having a Risk combat mechanic of just because you have X, you can roll X amount of dice. Because one, it's simpler in an already complex game. This mechanic here with the cards, and then you're like, okay, so I can hide the cards last second before I reveal. I think that's just slightly too convoluted. I think if it had a simpler combat mechanic, even if it wasn't as in your face, but the combat itself was a bit more impactful with a dice roll, something like that. Because some of the impact of a combat mechanic in a game is the reveal of like, oh, I got a 7. What's this person gonna get? They got a 5. I beat him by 2. That kind of thing. That interaction, I think, would have stepped it up for me a little bit more because I like all the other mechanics. I like the board. I like the snowballing effect that you're talking about. I like that you're trying to gain money, not all the territory.
Right.
Yeah.
Because that's the problem of Risk, that it always extends the game forever, is because you're trying to take over everything. And that can fluctuate wildly in Risk.
It's like poker.
Yeah. It can really extend it unintentionally. This is more constrained in that sense. You're just trying to get resources and money, but adding a more gritty combat to it, I think, would make the game more impactful for me. Personally.
Right.
Just generally.
Yeah.
But that being said, I have only played it the one time. I enjoyed playing it, and I have yet to play a Stonemaier game that's not, at the very least, interesting.
Sure.
And, like, stimulating to think about. Because you do start thinking about, okay, what am I going to do this next turn? And that is engaging in your brain, even if you're losing. And even if you lose the game, you're
memorizing elements or patterns. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah.
And that's my general thoughts.
That's great. Okay, so I think that
17.
Played it 3-4 times.
Once.
I think that would have been my 8th.
Yeah. So
Third
different,
time.
varying levels of.
Yes. So I think for me, I mean, just transparently, I think it's really hard to divorce my feelings for this game from where I was at in the board game scene whenever it came out. So I remember whenever
He camped out for it.
I was outside, I remember
EB Games at Times Square
Yeah.
or whatever the frick. I don't know.
It's like Jake and his iPhone camp out story.
Yeah. Me and Scott.
Yep. Yeah, but I remember when this game came out, and I remember the feeling of playing with friends or playing with my wife and just like discovering those new board games that sort of just like solidified my love for the hobby. And this is certainly one of them. Actually, I mean, that was one of the things that I said when we talked the day after we played this last time. I was like, man, I just felt like I was going back to those times. So I want to caveat everything I'm about to say with the fact that it is very hard for me to divorce those two sort of thoughts. I think that as far as this game goes, I think it does a whole lot with a little. One of the things that I have to kind of remember every time I step back into this game is that almost everything has this subtlety to it that you wouldn't really expect. There are a ton of different decisions that you could make at any given time on your turn. But honestly, like Jake was saying, that always feels like it's like 4 turns away. Like at your given time, you're like, okay, well, I'm going to build the tunnel, I think, in 2 turns. And then I'll be able to go here and I'll be able to get to the factory. But you've got other things that aren't necessarily like strategic at all. Like these little tokens right here. If your character ever interacts with one of these that are called encounters, you get to pull one of these goofy cards and you just read 3 scenarios and you get to pick something based on the scenarios. And it could say get 2 oil or pay a popularity and get wheat or something like that. So there's like an element of sort of randomness in that, but it's also thematic because your character's marching into this place and
You're the first one to discover it because of the token. Yeah.
And then we were talking about you're kind of stuck on your island, but I mean, there are ways like all of these red hexagons around the center are tunnels, so they all count as being adjacent to each other. So you could really, once you figure out how to get off of your little island, you can get across the map pretty easily. You can always go to the factory in the middle, and the factory is cool because it completely breaks the game. Like you get to rummage through this tiny deck of cards and add a 5th action to your 4 actions, and the 5th action is going to be completely broken. Like you're going to do something that nobody else can do, and people are going to be like, he got that from the factory, I got to get over there. And there, I feel like it never feels like the next decision that you're going to make is going to blow the game wide open for you, for me personally. But it always feels like there are a lot of subtle things that you can do. And I think to this point again, so we were talking about the stars earlier. The game's going to end whenever one player puts down all 6 of their stars. Now, the first person to do that just brings in the end of the game. It doesn't mean that they're going to win.
Yeah.
The popularity is going to multiply with the stars that you put down. So you have a good chance of doing pretty well if you have more stars down. But Wes could have ended the game and he could have like 14 points while we have like 60 or something like that. So I think there's like a subtlety here that I really appreciate. And for me, the combat is certainly one of those things. Like you're talking about, Wes was talking about this before. You've got this wheel, and you can bid the amount of combat that you want from where you're at on this track, on the combat track. But you can also add cards that can add to your value, but you don't have to, and you hide them. So the idea is you could make somebody waste really powerful cards and not play anything at all. You can say like, I'm going to lose this one, but I'm going to make them think that I'm going to do it. There's like an element of like bluffing only whenever it comes to combat, which is kind of bizarre. But it feels to me at home in a game where almost everything feels like and I don't mean this pejoratively, like in a bad way. It feels like almost everything has got the rough edge or like the sharp edges kind of like rounded off. So everything feels like it doesn't pack quite as much punch as you think it would. But I think that leads to the sort of like self-evolving that happens over the course of the game. And I don't think that could happen any other way. So,
yeah, I think.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, yeah, that's true when you think about it, because you're not gonna, like you said, you mentioned it. You're not going to win the game in one turn. You're not going to win the game with one move. There's not one move that will be like, "Pachow." You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's because there's not one thing or one mechanic that's, in your terms, like sharp enough or weighty enough.
Yeah.
It almost feels like it should be a campaign. Like that's kind of the feeling that it has. Like it should have a ongoing like continuation, like the legacy editions of games that come out where it continues on the more times you play it. It almost feels like it should have something like that. I think because of what you're talking about, Jake, and then what you were talking about with like kind of the edges rounded off. I think if it was sharper in that sense, it would pack more of a punch in the one playthrough. But I think because of what you're talking about, it does warrant more playthroughs to really like learn the strategy, to learn all of that stuff. But it almost feels like then the one playthrough might not feel satisfying all the time. But there is I've said this before whenever we've talked about other Stonemaier games, there is an element to me in Stonemaier games, if there's a weak point, the end game counting of stuff always feels like, oh, okay, we're done. We just counted up and you won. Okay, cool. Like,
I did.
as opposed to like, boom, there's the end of the game. I just won. Like, it doesn't have that like ending feel. But that's just something I felt as a I still thoroughly enjoy Stonemaier games. It's just one thing I kind of wish you could get from them. Like,
Sure.
Yeah.
Like I'm saying before we started recording, I was playing Wingspan with some guys. We played probably 5 or 6 games over the course of a weekend, and that felt like a good way to play Wingspan. It was like a bunch of times, because one time through doesn't always necessarily feel that satisfying. Like, you played a bunch, and like, oh, I learned this just this last time that I played it.
Yeah.
And something like this, I could see if there's a big span of time between you playing the game, you got to relearn everything. You're like, right, what is the strategy again? I can't. Like,
and the thing about games like this is I texted my buddy. He watched the TED Talk, and he was like, "Man, we've been playing more, but it's really hard, because we can't get people together to play it." And it's like, this game, unfortunately, is an event to play, and I think from a design. What?
Our game was like 3.5 to 4 hours long, I think.
And sure, Wes was learning, and I was a little rusty, and so.
But so we were, from the time we actually started playing to done, was like at least 2.5.
Yeah.
It was a long game.
Yeah, I think a design, I don't know, theory, a design. What would you say?
Perspective?
No, what he builds into his games, like a design philosophy. I think. I'm reading from Stonemaier Games, I guess would be how you say it. Jamie just wants you, and I from my interactions with him and personally and just talking and stuff, I think he just wants you to love playing games. And that's exactly why I think is because he's like, the end isn't the end. The experience is the goal, I think, in his design philosophy. At least it feels like that to me, because you're always trying to learn something new. You're right when you start to figure something out, the game might end, and I
don't think he would design a $90 game that you could only play once. That would not be like in his MO.
Or feel unpalatable because the combat has too much teeth, or if we're playing this with Ash and Chelsea or whatever, Ash might not be super competitive, so she's just on her own little peninsula doing her thing and getting money, and that's the thing about Stonemaier Games, is they're so palatable to most people that play games, because it's about playing the game, less like
like Wingspan. When you describe Wingspan and then you first start to play it, it's so like counterintuitive to what you think would be good in a game, and then you start playing it, and I have not played it with a single person that's been like, I didn't really like that.
Totally.
People that aren't into super crunchy games. My mom knows how to play Wingspan and likes playing it.
Totally.
Like,
Yeah.
but this might be a bit beyond that level.
Yeah.
But there is a similar element to that.
Sure.
You know?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, and I think
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. And I think speaking to his design philosophy as well, like I think what you pointed out that you could go pretty combat heavy and just snatch everybody's resources, and yeah, I mean like you get your mechs out pretty quick or you'd upgrade pretty quick. But there's also a totally viable strategy to just like chilling and doing a complete pacifist. Like you don't have to put down any stars on combat, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And I think
he had to.
You have to.
I had to.
You had to.
Which I don't. And again, on my point, I'm not necessarily advocating for combat being more in the game. I was specifically just talking about the mechanic of the combat
Well, also
itself.
because
Yeah.
that was his goal.
Yeah,
And so it's like it could be he felt like that because the game was steering him to do something, and then it was like, okay, they left. Good job.
Right.
And you're like, oh, you want me to do like give me
Like,
something else? You know
if
what I
you give me
mean?
the mentality, go wreck people, and then
Yeah,
the
yeah.
wrecking feels lackluster.
A little
and,
dent, maybe?
Like, I didn't really wreck anybody. I was just like, shoo.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
Then,
So that could be why. You know what I mean?
I'd be interested to play a game of this where like somebody just went so hard into being aggressive that it was like offensive. You know,
Everyone's like, let's go berserk no matter what. Yeah.
Because I don't think I've in my 8-9 games of playing this, it feels like most of the time, at worst, people are hesitant to even like interact with somebody. At best, like somebody's like, all right, I took your wheat. And then you just don't talk to them again for the rest of the
Yeah,
day.
whenever there was combat in our game, even when I was doing it, it was just like, I guess I'm attacking you? Maybe?
Yeah, the card tells me to. So I don't know. I think that's what's fun about Stonemaier Games, and again, we keep talking about it in general, but Scythe also does this where there's sort of a million different ways to end the game, and there's a million different ways to win. So
Yeah.
yeah.
So I mean, for me, I was talking about this before, but I feel like Jamie specifically. I think this was his like ace in the hole, like his magnum opus, and I don't think that he's made anything that's really like reached these heights since then. Personally, and I think Wingspan is more popular. That was Elizabeth Hargrave. She designed that. But I think Wingspan has been more popular just because, like you said, man, like people's moms are playing Wingspan right now. And it's, you know, but I feel like design wise, I think this just brought so much more to the design space, personally. And like I said, I mean, take everything I'm saying with a grain of salt, because I'm also thinking back to when everything was so fresh, and this was one of those
Well,
games
I don't think you have Wingspan without this.
Yeah.
Like,
sure.
I think there's elements in Wingspan that definitely, there's commonalities between the two, just like there is in all of their games. But I don't think you have Wingspan without this game first.
Sure.
You have a version of it or similar mechanics of it that are slightly more simplified, a bit more. Wingspan is very like pretty, like nice game. There's little colorful eggs that you have.
Yeah.
You know, it's a very like, it's non-aggressive in every sense of the word. I think maybe that's where I'm thinking of on this is like, it has an aggressive tone to it, like in look and feel, and then it's not particularly, which is maybe where there's some juxtaposition that doesn't maybe work for me all the time.
That's a good way to put it. I think that's a good way to put it.
It's gritty. For sure.
Like if there was a giant combat mechanic in Wingspan, you'd be like, "What is this?"
Falcon.
Yeah.
Even
The Falcon expansion.
well, even there is a bird that can take eggs from someone else, and that even feels weird because you're like, yeah,
I'm
it
sorry.
actually lets me. You know what I mean?
I'm building my sanctuary.
yeah.
But
My birds were living in perfect harmony.
to your point, I think like I can't imagine a game that is more well thought out than something like this. Like it's meticulously designed and meticulously thought about. Even the combat mechanic, while I might not be a fan of it, is well thought out, and like there's reason behind what they did. Nothing ever feels arbitrary in one of his games or one of their games.
Totally. Yeah. Also, sorry, caveat to what I just said. I think this is the best design game from Jamie. He made Tapestry after this. I actually like that a little bit better, but I think it's still his magnum opus.
Well, I don't think you have Tapestry without this.
That's true. Yeah.
Or Wingspan.
Or that's what they're saying.
Final thoughts? Do you have final Sorry, I took your job.
Final thoughts?
Oh,
the next
wow,
section?
nice. What's the next section, Natty? Is it final thoughts?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Generally, just my general thoughts. These are just fine personally.
Personally?
I would give it a high rating. I enjoyed it. I want to play it again. Maybe I'd feel differently about the combat thing if I wasn't forced into doing it a little
If you
bit.
weren't
You know,
Gunn.
like if I wasn't Gunner. But like very interesting, thought provoking. Like it's not just a passive game that you're like, oh, we're gonna get together and we'll play Scythe. It's like, no, this is
That's what John texted me. He's like, the person that shows up to a strategy game with the party game mindset, and he sent the like vomiting emoji.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, because you can't do that here.
no.
You know.
You coming over expecting to play Cards Against Humanity, and this gets popped out. You're like,
Scythe.
I think my brain just broke.
Yeah.
I can't.
Yeah.
But
Tell you
that's
what,
my-
these are Cards Against Humanity.
That's
Literally.
true.
You know what I mean?
I know what you mean.
But I generally enjoyed it. I would want to play it again. General thumbs up. Not. It's the perfect game.
Yeah.
But, yeah. Those are my general thoughts.
Here we go.
Nah, you should probably wrap it up.
Okay.
I think it's
Yeah,
this experience is cool, and you know I had a good time. I think it's this is from
Can
Natty's.
you hear the air quotes?
Yeah, sorry. If you're audio only, I'm doing air quotes.
Here's the.
These, to take this from Natty's bag of tricks, I think the pieces of this puzzle, of this game, are a little bit too nuanced. It's too much of a jigsaw puzzle, in my opinion. I think a lot of the head-scratching strategy moments get in the way of having fun, in my opinion. These are just my thoughts, personally. And so, I think for me,
Generally.
honestly, it is about if Scythe gets proposed and you like the people that proposed it, you know the people that proposed it, and you like hanging out with the people that proposed it, you'll have a good time just because you're spending time with those people. I don't think that necessarily means that it's going to be fun, which sounds weird, but I think this is a game where if you've played it and you have a similar experience, I can't be the only one, then you know what I mean. And so I left and I was like, cool. But I wasn't like space. It wasn't just
Sure.
for me personally. And so, like, I think I would say this is and that's what I think I asked you. I was like, can a game be good but you not like it?
I think it's absolutely possible.
Because I know that there's a well-shot movie that I don't like. Taylor Swift is a great singer, but I hate her music. And it's like... But I never thought about that in terms of board games, because I just don't... I don't have a big enough palette. And so, I don't... It's cool. I think I'm glad that, like, I own it. I'm glad that it can be something for an option for, like, if you get a hankering to play again, I'm down to play again.
Yeah.
It's just... It's not going to be top 5 for me recommended on any given game night, even if it's strategy games only. But it's hard because it's beautiful. It's well designed. It's intentional. It's it's got a lot of good things going for it. But it's like, I don't know. It's just not my cup of tea.
Well, one thing with that,
But it's good. I don't know. It's
I'm gonna
weird.
let you
You know what I
finish
mean?
Yeah. One thing that came to mind when you
Your
said this.
final thoughts have already been made.
I know.
I'm just letting you know.
I'm just-
Final thoughts.
One comparison for people that, if you're into board games, you might think about something like Time Stories. Like, there's something about it that's cool. Like, the idea of Time Stories is super cool. Like, you're going into a historical thing, you're exploring these rooms, you're doing all this stuff. But the mechanics of it can get in the way of the cool thing. And I think that might be partially what you're feeling, Jake, is like, I think the mechanics of it could be a deterrent from getting into what is a cool idea and like cool design, cool all of this stuff. The mechanics of it can kind of be a barrier sometimes if they don't work for what you like in a game.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Final thoughts. Personally.
Yeah. So I think for me, so I'll even given what I said before about everything feeling not quite as like it packs a punch as I feel like it should. I think everything in this game, from my perspective, seems to be there by design. Like, so, I mean, when you're using the example of time stories, I think there's a lot of things in time stories that they were like, they'll figure it out. It feels that way,
sure.
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
This doesn't. This feels
this
like,
is definitely better designed.
This feels tight, and I think, like, for me, there's certainly the beauty of the design. There's like the time that must have gone into creating this, sure. But for me, like, I like this game a lot. And I've already given the caveats for that, but I would say some of the higher praise that I could give it. I mean, you can see behind, we got a billion board games. And at this point, like, shelf space is really at a premium. So,
and look at how big that box is.
Look at that big old box. So for me and my wife, if a game is going to be on the shelf, we either have to play it a lot or like it enough that whenever it does come out, we feel like we can justify it. So Jake, when you're talking about an event game, like there's probably several games on the shelf that I'm like, yeah, we might play this one time a year, but that's okay. Because I mean, the other alternative is like, I don't think I would ever play this game like once a week. Certainly there would be people out there that would. I don't think it would work for the people that we game with. I don't think it would work for our group, But if we played this once, twice a year, like that's enough for me to warrant keeping it on the shelf. And so, yeah, I mean, like I'm not a big like numerical score kind of guy, because I think it sort of like invalidates all of the nuanced things that we were just talking about.
17.
Obviously 17, but I would give it a very high score. And I've played a lot of games, and this one still ranks up there pretty high for me. So yeah, it's good.
Go buy a Stonemaier game, because at the very least they are well done.
Yeah, that's true. Also, you were talking before about a campaign. They actually have an expansion for this called Rise of Fenris that makes it like an eight chapter campaign. I've heard great stuff. I haven't played through it personally, but you guys will do it over the next 8 years?
Over the next 8 years?
Once a year.
Once a year?
Yeah. I'll get back to you on that one.
Wrap up is yours.
Well, I have to wrap it up too? Okay.
You can throw it back to us, and then we'll wrap it up since...
I'm throwing it back to you guys.
All right, guys. So this has been our episode talking about Scythe from Stonemaier Games. Thank you for listening or watching. We'll be back at some point with this podcast and Not For You episodes. We've had multiple people ask us about, hey, when are you doing the podcast again? The answer is we don't.
Get off my back! That's what we say.
Yeah.
It's not for you.
Jake punches people. I just go, I have no idea.
Yeah.
But now that Peyton's married off, and Jake's married off, and I've got a baby coming. Once all that's done,
once the baby's done,
18 years.
So we'll probably be back in about 25 years.
Whatever format podcasts are in 25 years.
Holographic.
Yeah, we'll be in your living room.
Yeah, we'll come back as holograms doing a podcast. But thank you for listening. My name is Wes.
I'm Jake.
I'm Nathan. Natty.
And or Peyton. And bye.